I was 29 when this happened, working the overnight shift as a patient care tech in a mid-sized hospital just outside Columbus, Ohio. I had been on nights for almost 3 years by then, and the routine rarely changed. I'd clock in at 6:45 p.m., grab a stale coffee from the break room, check my assignment sheet, and start the quiet march through our long hallways. Most nights felt the same: dim lights, slow hours, and the kind of silence that only hospitals manage to hold. There was nothing special about that night. It was early November, cold enough outside that you could feel the draft creep in every time the ambulance bay doors opened. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and reheated cafeteria food. Nurses joked at the station, monitors beeped in their usual rhythm, and I had my mind on the usual tasks: vitals, restocking supplies, keeping an eye on the confused patients who wandered when they shouldn't. It was around 1 a.m. when things first felt a little off. Not in a way that made me nervous, just enough to make me pay attention. I'd finished checking on a patient in 414 and stepped back into the hallway. It was darker than usual, like a few of the ceiling panels were dimmer than before. Hospitals always have lighting issues, so I didn't think much of it. But the air felt heavier too, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees without the thermostat changing. I remember rubbing my hands together, trying to warm them up as I walked the hallway. My footsteps echoed more than usual, bouncing off the tile and disappearing down toward the far end where the orthopedic wing started. The whole floor only had 7 patients that night, so things were quiet enough that you could hear almost anything. A cough from a room 30 feet away. A bed rail clicking. A distant elevator dinging. Then, as I passed by room 409, a room that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it, I heard a soft shuffle. Just a quick scrape, like someone sliding their shoe an inch across the floor. I stopped and listened, expecting housekeeping or maybe maintenance. But the lights inside were off, and the door wasn't open enough for anyone to be moving around. I leaned a little closer. Nothing. Silence again. I was tired, and I told myself it was just the building settling. Hospitals make noises all the time: vents clicking, pipes knocking, nurses moving carts on the floor below. It wasn't worth thinking about. Still, I glanced at the door again as I walked away. It wasn't just the sound. Something about the room felt wrong. Like someone was standing just out of sight. Like the darkness inside wasn't empty. I shook it off and kept moving. I had vitals to finish, and the night felt too normal to start imagining things. But looking back now, that moment was the first sign, small enough to ignore, but just disturbing enough that it stuck with me. And by the end of that shift, I would wish I had trusted that feeling. The hospital where I worked wasn't large, but it had a way of feeling endless during the night shift. 3 floors, old construction, and long hallways that always seemed darker than they should have been once the sun went down. I worked on the 3rd floor, mostly medical patients, post-op recovery, and the occasional dementia case who needed extra eyes on them. The walls were painted a dull off-white, and the floors were that polished tile that squeaked under rubber shoes. Even when everything was clean, the place still smelled faintly like bleach and something metallic. Night shift usually ran slow. Most visitors left by 9 p.m., most doctors went home, and the building settled into this deep, low quiet that you only experience in hospitals after midnight. The overhead lights stayed dim to save energy, and the security team made their rounds every hour. It wasn't unsafe, just isolating. You could walk an entire wing without seeing another person. That night, I came in a few minutes early because one of the nurses, Danielle, had asked me to help her with a heavy patient during shift change. Danielle had been there longer than me, mid-30s, calm, good at her job. We worked together most nights, and she was one of the few people I trusted when things went sideways. The rest of the staff was the usual crew: Mark, the charge nurse; Jessa, the new grad who was still learning; and Paul, an older nurse who mostly kept to himself. Pretty normal group. My tasks were simple: check vitals every 4 hours. Keep a close watch on the confused patient in 415 who tried to get out of bed the night before. Restock the linen cart. Make sure the post-op patient in 421 stayed comfortable and didn't try to walk without help. Everything felt routine, at first. The The floor was quiet except for the steady beep of heart monitors and the hum of the heating vents. Outside, the temperature had dropped to about 28 degrees, and the windows had that thin layer of condensation you get on cold nights. Every time the ambulance bay doors opened on the first floor, you could feel the faint vibration travel through the building, but it wasn't anything unusual. Around midnight, Mark told us the census was low enough that we'd only need one tech on the floor. That meant I was covering both wings by myself. It wasn't a big deal. I'd done it dozens of times. The third floor was one of the calmer units, and most of our patients were stable enough that emergencies were rare. My plan was simple. Finish vitals, help Danielle empty a drain, grab a quick snack from the break room, and ride out the rest of the shift. Nothing in the air hinted that anything was wrong. No codes, no wandering patients, no visitors refusing to leave. Just another slow overnight shift. Just another quiet hospital floor. And at that point, I had no reason at all to think anything dangerous was waiting on the other side of that hallway. I started my rounds a little after 1 a.m., clipboard in hand, trying to move quietly so I didn't wake anyone who had finally managed to fall asleep. Most of the rooms were dark except for the faint blue glow of monitors. The floor felt colder than usual, enough that I noticed it through my shoes, but I blamed the old heating system. It always acted up at night. When I stepped into the hallway leading toward the older wing, something felt different. It wasn't obvious at first. Just a slight change in the air, like the temperature dipped a few degrees. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, the way they sometimes do right before they flicker. I didn't think anything of it, but it did make me walk a little slower. As I passed room 409, the same room that had been empty all week, I heard a soft noise from inside. It wasn't loud enough to alarm me. More like a faint shuffle, the kind someone makes when they're adjusting themselves in bed. Except no one was assigned to that room. I paused and listened. Silence. I moved on, finished vitals in the next two rooms, and came back down the hall. This time the door to 409 looked different. It was open about an inch. I was almost sure I'd seen it closed earlier. Cleaning staff usually shut all the empty rooms before heading home. I leaned in just a bit, trying not to overthink it. The room was completely dark. Not even the standby light from the wall monitor was on. I waited a few seconds, then kept walking. I didn't want to shine my flashlight in there and wake up someone who maybe wasn't supposed to. Sleeping in that room. But as I walked away, it felt like the air behind me shifted. A small, almost unnoticeable change in pressure, like someone had walked past, or a door had opened farther. I turned around. Nothing had moved. I brushed it off and went to check on the fall-risk patient in 415. He was asleep, breathing steady, blanket pulled to his chest. I adjusted the bed rails and stepped out. That's when I heard it again. A soft tap. Not from 415. From farther down the hall. It sounded like someone lightly flicked a fingernail against metal. Once. Then again, a little faster. I followed the sound, my steps slow and controlled. It was coming from the empty supply room near 409. When I reached the doorway, the noise stopped immediately, almost like whoever or whatever made it knew I was there. I stood still, trying to listen past the hum of the vents. At first, I heard nothing. Then a faint exhale came from the darkness inside. It didn't sound like the vents. It didn't sound mechanical. It sounded human. Slow, steady, almost controlled breathing. My fingers tightened around the clipboard. Something wasn't right. Nothing huge had happened, nothing dramatic, but the feeling in my gut told me something on that floor was off. The hall seemed too quiet, the darkness too thick, and the empty rooms didn't feel empty anymore. And for the first time that night, I felt like someone else was awake and watching. The hallway felt different after that moment outside the supply room. I tried to keep my pace normal, but every step felt heavier, like the building itself was warning me to slow down. I kept telling myself I was just tired. That night shift does this to everyone eventually. But the quiet wasn't the usual hospital quiet. It felt watched, like the kind that follows you in an empty parking lot when you know someone else is there. I walked back toward the nurse's station to shake it off, but before I got halfway, the lights above me flickered once, just a quick blink, and then steadied again. They weren't supposed to do that. Maintenance had replaced the whole row 2 days earlier. I glanced at the ceiling, then over my shoulder. The hallway behind me was completely empty. I spotted Danielle at the station charting, and I almost said something to her. But I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I kept it to myself. She asked if I was okay when I walked by. I told her I was fine. I wasn't. I still had vitals to finish, so I went down the opposite wing to try to reset my head. Everything was normal over there. Machines beeped, patients slept, and the temperature felt normal again. For a few minutes, I convinced myself I had imagined everything. Then the phone at the far end of the hall rang. Not the nurse's station phone. The wall phone outside room 409. The phone that shouldn't ring because that line wasn't active. I stared at it for a second, waiting for someone else to react, but no one did. I was the only one close enough to hear it. The ring wasn't loud, it was muffled, like the phone was old or the speaker damaged. But it rang steadily, one tone after another, never stopping. I took a step toward it, then stopped. The hallway felt colder again. The lights above me buzzed, long and low. The air felt heavy, like walking into a basement. When I got close enough to see the screen on the phone, I froze. It wasn't displaying a number. It wasn't displaying anything at all. It was completely black, dark, unpowered. Yet the ringing kept going. My chest tightened. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the phone. The ringing stopped as soon as I reached the corner, almost like it knew I had left. I turned back toward the nurse's station, ready to tell someone this time, but something at the end of the hall stopped me. The door to room 409, which had been cracked open earlier, was now wide open. Not just open, tilted inward like someone had pushed it hard and walked inside without bothering to close it. The darkness inside was thick enough that I couldn't see even the outline of the bed. I felt the instinct to step back, to get as much distance as possible, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there staring at that doorway, the cold air pressing against my back. Then, from deep inside the unlit room, I heard slow, steady footsteps move toward the threshold. Not rushed, not panicked, just walking, deliberate, quiet, and getting closer. And at that moment, for the first time that night, the thought hit me clearly. Someone was in that room, and they weren't hiding anymore. The footsteps inside room 409 grew clearer, soft taps on tile, one after another, steady and unhurried. I took a slow step back, keeping my eyes fixed on the doorway. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs felt heavy, like the air around me had thickened. Then a shape moved inside the darkness. Not a full silhouette, just the faintest outline of someone standing near the bed. I couldn't make out a face, just the presence of a man. Broad shoulders, still posture, watching. "Sir?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This room is closed. You're not supposed to be in here." He didn't move. He didn't answer. I thought maybe he was confused or injured, so I reached for the wall switch and flicked the light on. Nothing happened. The light stayed dead. The man shifted slightly, like he was turning his body toward me. My heart hammered in my chest. I took another step back, and as I did, something metallic glinted in his hand, a thin strip of reflective steel catching the hallway light. A blade. That was all I needed to see. I turned and bolted down the hall. My shoes smacked against the tile as I sprinted, trying not to look behind me, but I could hear him moving. At first it was a slow walk, but then the pace changed, faster, harder, like he realized I was trying to get away. "Danielle." I shouted, my voice cracking. "Call security." The nurse's station came into view, but as I rounded the corner, the lights overhead flickered again, plunging the hallway into a split second of darkness. When the lights snapped back, he was closer than he should have been. Too close. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall just as Danielle stood from her chair. "What's wrong?" she said, eyes wide. "There's a man," I gasped. "In 409, he has a knife." She stepped toward me, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Don't go that way." Mark, the charge nurse, reached for his radio. "Security to 3rd floor, now." Before he could finish the call, the sound of running footsteps echoed around the far corner of the hallway. Hard, fast, closing in. I didn't wait to see how close he was. I pulled Danielle toward the supply closet across from the station. In here, now, I hissed. We slipped inside, and I shut the door quietly but quickly. The closet was cramped, just shelves, boxes, and a small patch of floor. Danielle backed up as far as she could, her breathing shaking. I pressed my ear to the door. Footsteps slowed outside, then stopped, right in front of us. The handle shifted, just a tiny movement, like someone testing if it was locked. My breath froze in my chest. I held the handle with both hands, praying he wouldn't force it. The metal on the other side tapped, slowly, rhythmically. He was dragging the blade along the door. Danielle covered her mouth, trying not to make a sound. I felt the vibration of each scrape through the handle. Then, silence. A moment later, the pounding of heavy boots and the shout of security officers filled the hall. The footsteps outside our door faded fast, retreating toward the far end of the wing. Someone ran. Someone chased. And all I could do was keep my hands locked around that handle, waiting to hear whether the man who had been standing in the darkness of room 409 was caught, or had disappeared again into the empty corners of our hospital. Security reached the third floor fast. 3 officers, all of them out of breath, radios buzzing with updates from downstairs. They told us to stay in the supply closet until they cleared the hallway, but I couldn't stand still anymore. As soon as they gave the okay, Danielle and I stepped out, both of us shaken and looking in every direction. The hall was empty, completely still. One of the officers, Alvarez, asked me what happened. I explained everything, how the man was in 409, the knife, the chase, how he tried to get into the closet. Alvarez nodded, but kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected the guy to reappear at any second. Security split up, 2 checking the stairwells and 1 sweeping each wing. I followed Alvarez back toward 409, even though every part of me didn't want to be near that room again. He told me to stay behind him as he pushed the door fully open. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the floor. The bed sheets were pulled halfway off, like someone had been sitting on the edge just minutes before. The curtain was slightly moved, the kind of shift that happens when someone brushes past it. But what stood out most was the smell, an old, stale odor, like sweat mixed with something metallic. Alvarez swept the room with his flashlight. That's when he found it. Not the man. Not the knife. Something worse. A folded patient gown stuffed under the bed frame. A crumpled wristband next to it. Both smeared with dirt and old stains that didn't look like they came from our unit. Alvarez picked the wristband up carefully with gloves and read the label. His face changed immediately. "That's impossible," he muttered. I stepped closer.
What?
"Who is it?" He didn't look at me right away. He just stared at the wristband like he wasn't sure if he was reading it right. "This patient, he was discharged 3 days ago," Alvarez said. Security escorted him out because he was refusing to leave the building. I felt my stomach drop. Why was he here? He wasn't supposed to be, Alvarez said. He's not supposed to be anywhere near this hospital. He had been sleeping in stairwells and storage closets for weeks before we caught him. I blinked, trying to understand. He was living here? Alvarez nodded. He knew the entire layout. Every blind spot. Every shift change. Every room that stays empty. A cold feeling spread through my chest. He hadn't wandered into 409 by accident. He had chosen it. He came back tonight, Alvarez continued. But this time, he wasn't just hiding. Before I could respond, one of the other officers ran up the hallway, breathing hard. "You need to see this," he said.
Now.
We followed him to the south stairwell. At the bottom of the steps, tucked behind the railing, was a small pile of items, empty food wrappers, a cheap flashlight, a water bottle, and something that made my skin crawl. A small notebook. Inside were pages of crude sketches, hallways, corners, doorways. And on one page, drawn in shaky lines, was a detailed sketch of the 3rd floor. The final drawing showed the supply closet, and 2 figures inside it. One tall, one shorter, both labeled Tech, Nurse. He had been watching us long before tonight, and he had planned exactly where we would run. The police arrived not long after security found the notebook. They questioned us separately, then together then walked the entire third floor again with 2K, 9 units. The dogs picked up a scent around room 409, followed it down the stairwell, and lost it outside near the loading dock. Tire tracks cut through the frost on the pavement, leading toward the service road behind the hospital. Whoever the man was, he was gone. My shift dragged on after that, even though I didn't do much else. Mark sent me home early, but I sat in the break room for almost an hour before I felt steady enough to walk to my car. When I finally stepped outside, the cold air hit me hard. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the shadows around the parking deck. I didn't see anything, but I didn't feel alone either. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept imagining the man's shape in the darkness of room 409, the way he stood so still, the blade in his hand, the silence. The police told us they'd look into him. They said they'd check nearby shelters, review old security footage, talk to anyone who fit the description. But I'd worked at that hospital long enough to know how things really went. People slipped through cracks all the time, especially people who didn't want to be found. I didn't sleep that morning. I lay in bed, replaying every moment in my head. The footsteps, the phone ringing without power, the open door, the way he walked, not rushed, not frantic, just steady and controlled, like he knew the building better than we did. The notebook bothered me most. Not just the drawing of the supply closet, but something the officers never should have shown me. On the last page, almost like an afterthought, was a list. Short, simple, handwritten. Night shift staff, 3rd floor. Tech, male. Nurse, female. Charge, male. New grad, female. Tall security, glasses. Old security, limp. Every line had check marks beside it. Every line except one. Next to my title, Tech, male, the space was blank. No check. No mark. No line. Just empty. I don't know what it meant. I don't know if it meant he didn't finish what he came for, or if he planned to come back. For the next few nights, I tried to work like nothing had changed. But I kept catching small noises behind me, little shifts in the hallway air, doors cracked open when they should have been closed. Everyone on the floor was tense. Even the security officers walked slower, checking around corners before committing to them. The hospital is big. Too big. Too many places to hide. They never found him. Not the man. Not the knife. Not the clothes he was wearing. The police told us he probably left the city, that he wouldn't risk coming back to a place with cameras and guards. I want to believe that. I really do. But every time I walk past room 409, I still feel it, the same cold drop in my stomach, the same faint shift in the air, the same quiet that doesn't feel like normal hospital quiet. Sometimes, when the lights dim at night, I swear I still hear slow footsteps inside that empty room. And on the worst nights, I'm almost sure they're waiting for me to stop and listen again.